Hey, it's Tony Bruschi, and this is our week in review over the weekend, taking a look back at some of the most compelling conversations and stories that we've covered for you of the last week. Brand new episodes back Monday morning, bright and early, 5 a.m. here on the podcast.
This is an examination of the hidden human condition.
This is the Hidden Killers podcast
with Tony Bruschi.
We're talking with former prosecutor Lori Gilbertson and with Tribeca Blue Consulting about Bryan Kohberger's plea last week. I want to get some insight from a former prosecutor. You've been in courtrooms far more than most of us. Is this common? Is this a normal thing to not give a verbal plea? Is there a strategy involved here that could benefit him down the road? What is your take on this, Lori?
Yeah, I've looked at this a lot, and, this seems to be something that is certainly fairly common in Idaho, where a criminal defendant at their arraignment does not have to enter a plea. And if they do not enter a plea, then the judge will enter a not guilty plea for them. And what it appears to be is a few different things, and it does not seem to be so out of the ordinary in a case like this, where now the clock has started as to whether or not the prosecution will seek the death penalty. They have 60 days from the time of arraignment. So that clock has started. So, him standing silent is basically saying a few things. First, I think that his attorneys also may not have had the, evidence that they needed to really enter a not guilty plea, because obviously they're not entering a guilty plea right now.
Mm-hmm.
So it certainly could be that. I know they have said they're waiting on some discovery. They're waiting to interview some other witnesses, so they may not have wanted him to even enter the not guilty plea. The second is that from my look at everything under Idaho law, that this possibly enables him to certainly negotiate from maybe a different standpoint should the prosecution decide to seek the death penalty here. So the defense is kind of leaving their options open by doing that. Even, I think, had he entered a not guilty plea, he still had the option to negotiate. So, honestly, I don't know that it makes a whole lot of difference there.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, it could just be Bryan Kohberger.
Yeah.
From everything I think we've seen, I think from everything you've talked about quite a bit on your show, he's not going to be an easy client.
Mm-hmm.
And this just may be a defendant who did not want to say not guilty, did not want to enter a plea, did not want to speak in court. And because he didn't want to do so, that's how his attorney proceeded. So, without the attorney speaking out about it, or, certainly we're not going to hear necessarily from Bryan Kohberger about it.
Mm-hmm.
Those are kind of the three things that go into, why this would have been the choice at the arraignment. And ultimately, I think you end up with the same result. The prosecution will decide whether there are aggravating factors and they're going to seek the death penalty. The defense will then decide whether there is something to talk about in terms of a plea. The prosecution will decide whether they even want to offer anything,
Mm-hmm.
and then they'll move forward. And actually him saying not guilty or having the judge say that for him while he stood silent seemed kind of more like courtroom drama to me than anything else.
Really doesn't change a whole lot if he had said it aloud or not. It's on the record as not guilty because mm-hmm. essentially it defaults to that. If you don't enter an actual plea. The thing that stood out to me immediately was that on the death penalty, that they have 60 days now to decide whether or not they're going to seek the death penalty, and making some negotiating room. And does it make negotiating room? Does it truly make anything extra? Does it make it a little bit more? Well, see, he never actually said not guilty. Maybe it is going to be a playing card of maybe taking the death penalty off the table if he were to admit to the guilt. BTK did the exact same thing. And there's been a lot of analogies about BTK and him. We can talk about that in a moment. But does it truly create more playing room for him to negotiate?
Doesn't seem like he's in a very strong negotiating position from where I sit looking at it. And certainly whether he says not guilty or not at the arraignment, I don't think makes a whole lot of difference. Ultimately, the only negotiating power, it seems to me, that he has is to offer to plead guilty to therefore end all of this for the victims' families to take the pressure off the prosecution of proving their case against him and going through all of that and putting the victims' families through all of that, and basically just having things resolved at a much quicker pace than it would be at a trial. Even though they've set this trial date for October, I do not see that at all happening then. But that's his negotiating power, is really just the power of his plea.
This is an examination of the hidden human condition.
This is the Hidden Killers Podcast.
The Hidden Killers Podcast.
With Tony Bruschi.
Lori Gilbertson with Tribeca Blue Consulting, former prosecutor. As always, thank you for your insight. Hey, if you like the podcast and you'd like to get ad-free versions of it, you can just binge away, no ads, just next. Sign up through Apple Podcasts, becoming a premium subscriber there. You'll not only get ad-free access to this podcast, but our entire family of podcasts within the True Crime Today family. There's a whole bunch of them for you to check out right there when you sign up through Apple Podcasts. So do that. Even try it for 3 days free right now. We appreciate that support. My name is Tony Bruschi. Stay with us.